Hello, I am Amy Rapone. I'm so glad you all are here. A couple things just to get off the table right off the bat. Um, this is certainly a basics of what plant-based eating is, and then we'll go into a little bit about the summer harvest. And all right, so a little bit about me. Again, my name is Amy Rapone. I've been a dietitian for 10 years, and all of those years I've been with ECHN, did all of my training with ECHN as well. I'm in your community. I am here in Tolland. I've gone to Rockville and Manchester hospitals my entire life, born in Manchester personally. And I'm currently working in both hospitals. I specialize in nutrition around mental health, especially too. So I work in the mental health units, but I love it all. So I'm glad to chat with you all about this today. My two favorite words in nutrition care. So this one will come up a lot. I'm not one to really give you anything that is, I'll give you research, but everything depends on what works for you. So always being curious about what might work for you and how that could fit into your lifestyle, and being compassionate about meeting yourself where you are too, so that you're always working from a place of, does this work for me? Individualized nutrition is a really important factor in nutrition care for me. I don't think that there's always a one size fits all for everyone. And so that's a little bit about me. All right, so what are we going to cover today? So we'll definitely be talking about what plant-based eating is, why it's beneficial to us, how to eat plant-based without the rules. I know when it comes to the word diet, or which is why it's not necessarily plant-based eating diet, it's just plant-based eating. So how we can incorporate it into our lives with making small changes. What's in season? It's the height of season here in Connecticut, of growing season, so we have lots of fun things around. And then how we can incorporate some of those foods into our diet, starting the next time you drop by a farmer's stand. All right. Okay. So first and foremost, what is plant-based eating? So plant-based eating is means that the majority of your diet, right? So it's based in, the majority of your diet is coming from foods that are growing from the earth. This can include fruits and vegetables, legumes and beans, nuts and seeds, whole grains, vegetable-based oils. That's where a lot of your foods will be coming from. The nice thing about plant-based eating is that it can give you a little bit more flexibility. You don't have to totally say no meats, no dairy, no other animal products, but it's not the main part of your meal. And when you're doing traditional meal planning, that's not the, sometimes when we meal plan, be like, okay, we'll have chicken this night. And we don't think about the other pieces nearly as much. In this case, we're thinking about what are the other pieces, and do I feel like I want to include a meat product or a dairy product or other animal product in your meal that day. All right, so how is it different from things like vegetarian or vegan diets? So it is, and it isn't different. They can certainly, in the Venn diagram, overlap a little bit. So plant-based diets, kind of like an umbrella term that vegetarian and vegan diets definitely fall within. So a lacto-ovo vegetarian, or sometimes people just say vegetarian, they primarily are eating their plant-based foods, but sometimes will have dairy and eggs. They feel more comfortable with that. Some people choose to eat vegan, usually using no animal products in your food, or even sometimes in clothing, makeup, etc. And that also includes things like honey and gelatin and some alcohols that include fermentation, depending on how people decide that feels ethically good to them. I think a lot of times when we talk about vegetarian and vegan diets, ethics is a big piece to the puzzle that comes into play for a lot of people. All right. So why is plant-based eating so popular? We've definitely seen that it's the terminology of plant-based has grown pretty significantly over the last few years, but the principles of plant-based eating aren't necessarily new. As we've talked about vegetarian and vegan diets, those certainly isn't a new terminology to us at all, right? Those have been popularized for hundreds of years at this point. And we also have incredible evidence that the Mediterranean diet can have a great impact on our health and longevity as well. And the Mediterranean diet is essentially a plant-based diet too. We'll go into it a little bit more, but the Mediterranean diet is focused on those plant-based foods where we just have some supporting proteins here and there that might come from an animal source. And plant-based eating is just not a terminology that we've had yet, but it's certainly not new to a lot of people. I think especially during the COVID-19 lockdowns, a lot of people started focusing on their health a lot more, and it seems like plant-based eating really got their legs during that time, and it has stuck around over the last few years, and I think that is a lot of times because of its flexibility. So, right, how can the Mediterranean diet be plant-based, right? You can eat fish and chicken and things of that nature. And so, absolutely, that's where we sometimes get caught up in the use of diets in that way. There's foods that we think should be off limits or allowed. It's kind of this black and white thinking that we can often have around how we should, quote unquote, eat. And with the Mediterranean diet, you're primarily consuming those plant-based foods and olive oils. Sometimes we'll see dairy and cheese and yogurt things fall into place with that as well. And we usually would include fish and poultry like a few times a week instead of like 3 times a day, where some people would have their protein in that way. And red meat is usually even less frequent. But again, going back to that vegetarian basics of what I think a lot of people think that plant-based is, just kind of gives a little bit of flexibility, so that the nice word about the word based in plant-based is that this is the majority of it. It doesn't have to be all from plants, but depends on what feels good to you. Another option that a lot of people choose too is pescatarian, if anyone's heard of that. Essentially, they are vegetarian, but they also include fish. They feel like that's an important source to their diet, and so they include that as well. So a little bit more about diets with rules. So before we go deeper into the details of a plant-based diet, I want to make sure that y'all know only you get to decide what you eat. Just because I'm a professional, just because anyone who tells you about a diet it worked for them, doesn't mean that you have to follow those things, right? Diets with rules can feel really limiting. They can be expensive. They can be difficult to prepare on your own. And often when you don't do it right, as some people would say, it can have a really big side of shame with it too, about like, oh, maybe I didn't do it right. That's why it's not quote unquote working, right? So this plant-based dieting isn't necessarily, it can, but it's not, the goal of it isn't to lose weight, right? It's a way to improve your health on a lot of our different biomarkers that we'll cover in a little bit, that you still want to get a good amount of food so that you are getting all the nutrients that you need. That's the most important piece to the puzzle to me as a dietitian. And so today we're not doing that. Plant-based eating has no rules, has some guidelines, some things that you can start to play around with, but it's how we can start to shift the ratios of those beneficial foods in your diet so that it doesn't have that side of shame to it. You're starting where you're at, and that's the big important thing. All right, so what are some of the benefits of plant-based eating? So certainly we see that it has a lot of impact in our heart health, in helping us reduce our saturated fat intake and increasing our fiber. Saturated fats primarily are going to be coming from your animal proteins, or animal, not just proteins, animal sources, and our more tropical oils like coconut and palm oils. Those can have more of a saturated fat component to them. And so when we are looking to reduce that for our heart health, we can find that a lot in animals, or pardon me, not in animals, in plant-based foods, because it just doesn't exist other than those couple that I had mentioned, the tropical oils. And increasing our fiber can show a really important and significant improvement in our blood pressure, reducing the risk of heart failure and stroke. And certainly when we see the the ads for Cheerios, right? When we talk about how much oats can have an impact in our cholesterol levels and our lipid levels, certainly it's true, right? It sounds like really gimmicky, but it actually does really work. So when we see those certain soluble fibers that we'll talk about in our whole grains, those can really help us out a lot. In folks who have blood sugar issues or trying to control that a little bit or reduce their risk of it, increased fiber can definitely aid in any kind of insulin sensitivity and glucose control. It helps when we're having fiber. When we increase that, when we have food with it, that's a carbohydrate, can bring that sugar up, but the letdown isn't quite so hard when we have fiber in it. It's kind of a slower release. Which is always helpful and helps get that hemoglobin A1C number in a nice, tasty range that we like it to be in. In cancer prevention or cancer risk prevention, the colors that we see in our variety of fruits and vegetables, even those white and brown ones like mushrooms and cauliflower, are the proof of a variety of antioxidants and carotenoids, that those are the things that are helping break down those cells that are reproducing weird. So that has proven to reduce some of our cancer risk around that as well, and improving our plant-based food options. We also see it in reducing our inflammation and increasing our immunity. A high quality whole foods diet can show great promise in getting appropriate omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants, and other balanced micronutrients that help reduce that inflammation and increase our immunity. I think we all could use a little bit of that. Around omega-3 fatty acids, so it's very true, right? Fish oil is one of our greater sources of that, which is why something like the Mediterranean diet could be a help in that faction. But also we have plenty of plant-based sources of omega-3 fatty acids that are the ALA. So we can get those from things like soybeans, flaxseed, chia seeds. We can get them in walnuts and different variety, usually are nuts and seeds, things that contain some kind of oils to them that can still be helpful in that as well. And certainly increasing our fiber intake can aid in feeding that positive gut microbiome that everyone keeps talking about in our gastrointestinal health, and helping those digestive patterns, especially if you're someone who has issues with constipation or anything uncomfortable around that. But a little bit of a note when it comes to the GI tract, when we're increasing our fiber intake, which usually we would be with a plant-based eating plan, if your current diet doesn't really have a whole lot of fiber in it, we want to make sure that we introduce these things pretty slow. When we can go hard on the fiber, sometimes it can introduce a lot of bloating or cramping, loose stools, things like that are a little less fun. So we want to make sure that we go on the slow side with that, but certainly over time and increasing that. All right, so this is another piece to the puzzle that I always like to talk about when we're talking about the benefits of a certain way of eating. We can eat the most beautiful, perfect diet that exists to us. However, there are determinants of our health and genetics that are always going to also come into play, in addition to the foods that we eat and how much we move. So I like to make sure that we cover that there might be other things that affect our health outside of our personal responsibility in health and just how we're born and the genetics that we have. So knowing that there may not necessarily be a 100% way to get the benefit. We'll have some benefit for sure in this style of eating, but knowing that it's not going to totally prevent something 100%. I'd just like to make sure that that's something that is discussed and covered. All right, so we've covered what it means. We've covered, why we should do it. And so how do we do it? is the next question. But before we dig into that, I'd love to see in the chat, does anybody have any questions so far? I think I see one here. Vegetarian sources if you're gluten or lactose free. Absolutely. So vegetarian sources of protein, is that what you were asking? But if anybody else has other questions too, they'd like to throw in the chat that we've covered so far, I'm really happy to dig in and chat about that as well. But vegetarian sources of maybe guessing protein. So I'll go on that for a little bit. And I'll have a little slide on that ahead of time. But certainly if you have celiac disease, so gluten would be a non-part of the thing there. Is any of your other whole grains. It's easier to find gluten-free oats now than we had before, and certainly we can do things like quinoa and, oh sure, Heidi, I'll touch that in a minute. Are like farro and bulgur and things around different seeds and grains that we can use as sources of our whole grains there. And then lactose free, you can choose to go dairy free completely with that. But your vegetarian sources, again, would come from nuts, seeds, beans, would be your main source. We do get a little bit of protein in some of our other like leafy greens and things like that, but it's not as much. So we have some that are definitely the rock stars, especially when it comes to our soy-based products that we'll talk about in a little bit. And actually, we'll have another opportunity with ECHN in the future to talk about that, and I'll bring that up a little bit at the end too. And Heidi, the oils that have saturated fat in them are animal-based fats, so butters, things that are just already existing when you have a piece of meat. And then the plant-based ones that have it are coconut oil and palm oil. So palm oil has certainly had quite the resurgence when the trans fat banning came into play. So that's a piece to the puzzle that we've had to, the food companies, not us, the food companies have had to kind of tweak what they're going to utilize in that way. That's going to be a cheap, easy, usually plant-based, because people like when they can toss that that vegan sign on their paper, on their packaging, excuse me. So we see a lot of palm oils around, so those can be a saturated fat, and then our coconut oil. That also had quite a resurgence as of late. But the oils that you really want to look for are the ones that are kind of fluid at room temperature. If they become a solid at room temperature or really cold, those likely have a more saturated fat component to them. That's the hot trick to know what you're looking at. So when it comes to protein, soy is probably going to be your friend, and your legumes and beans. If you can't do nuts, sometimes quinoa is a really great source for that as well. It's a seed instead of a nut, so a lot of times people can tolerate that better too. So that's always an option. And so now we'll kind of dig into how does one eat plant-based? So my best suggestion, instead of going like the opposite of cold turkey, I guess, but jumping in head first into a new plan of eating, this is an opportunity to start where you are. Kind of take a look at your current meal patterns and the food choices that you're currently making, and think, okay, this is how I'm currently eating. What are the things that I don't particularly love about the way that I'm eating? Are there pieces that I could change and that would feel really good? Or things that feel really difficult, like especially if you're somebody who has cancer or has COPD or something in that protein is really important that you get so that you can hold on to your muscle mass. There might be a piece where we do want to include more animal proteins because they're going to be a little bit more bioavailable to you, and they're getting more bang for your buck essentially in getting the protein that you might need. And so it's always important to talk to your doctor anytime you want to change the way that you eat. ideally chatting with them about your past medical history to see what might be more appropriate for you. Most doctors aren't going to be mad at you if you show up saying that you want to be eating plant-based, but I think that making sure that you're making quality choices and that you are still getting the nutrients that you particularly need is important. And so um, fiber and nutrient rich foods are going to be the main thing that we want to try to add in. So the point of eating plant-based too isn't to go, okay, I'm plant-based. How many plant-based bars can I find, or powders, or things of that nature? Those are all great to throw in your bag when you need them, but the ideal plan here is to make sure that you are including more quality whole foods. I think would be the most appropriate. And then, so it could be something as small as adding a tomato to your grilled cheese when you make a grilled cheese during the day, or going through your local supermarket or farmer's market and finding a fruit or vegetable that you've never tried before, especially if you have a family at home and kids are involved, or even maybe a stubborn partner who is like, not a vegetable person, um, or a plant-based person. Taking them to the store and be like, let's find one thing that maybe we can try to include here, that we just be a little bit fun with it and have a good time, and learning how to prepare a certain food and dedicating an evening or an afternoon to doing that. Um, Also, maybe there's a place where you consume a lot of butter, and olive oil could be a really great substitute in some cases. There's some that might be a little bit harder of a swap, so sometimes baking that might be difficult. But, if you're sauteing something, can we use olive oil instead of butter? Or can we use olive oil as a drizzle after the fact, that we don't even necessarily have to cook in oil? And then just kind of build from there. What does anybody have any particular areas in their diet right now where they could make a small change? Avocado is a wonderful unsaturated fat. It's absolutely a lovely one to include. You know what? I could make this one little switch, or or maybe you need some assistance with what you could swap out. I'm happy to do that. All right, so these are the general guidelines that I like to work towards when we're talking about plant-based. Again, we can definitely start small. We don't have to dive headfirst into a whole different eating plan, throwing everything out of the cabinets and filling the fridge up with new things. We don't necessarily have to do this. You can just make a slow transition to including more foods that feel a little bit more fun. So ghee is it's clarified butter, but it is still an animal protein. So it wouldn't necessarily fall into this category of plant-based. I believe it still contains its saturated fats, but I'm pretty certain that it would. Yeah, it's still a cow's butter made from cow milk, but is there such a thing as too many nuts because of fat? Because you're not really eating milk or eating meat, excuse me. Yeah, when it comes to nuts, so too much nuts as far as how much your gut can handle might be a piece to that puzzle to keep mind of. But when it comes to the fat, most of the fats that we're getting from nuts are going to be your unsaturated fats. Peanuts have a little bit higher saturated fat content, especially if they're roasted nuts. We want to see what they're roasted in. If they're roasted in like a palm oil or anything like that. But fat's not necessarily a bad thing. So I think that was kind of a hot tip during the 80s and 90s, where everybody wanted to kind of go on the low fat side of things. But we want it to still be a good representative of your diet, but it is, I guess it depends on how much we're talking about here. But, I think that if there was a way that you were going to be consuming fats, I think that nuts would be a great way to do that. And is Amy's mac and cheese okay with healthy cruciferous vegetables? Amy's macaroni and cheese, whether it's the dairy-free or the regular version, honestly, is one of the best frozen macaroni and cheeses I think that you can get on the market. It is absolutely delicious, and I highly recommend it. And adding some extra veggies in there is lovely. And is dairy good? Needing calcium is hard to do with vegetables. It can be really hard to do with just vegetables. So if you're someone that it's also less bioavailable, which is why we press milk so much. And so we're also going to get good calcium intake when we have appropriate vitamin D and vice versa. They are a very symbiotic components to each other that if you wanted to go plant-based, there's certainly a way that you can supplement those things as well, if that was something that felt good to you. But again, dairy is not necessarily bad. We want to watch out for the saturated fat content of it, but it can be a great source of protein. And, if that's something that feels good to you in your diet. So we just want to be mindful of some of that. But again, if you're doing the regular Amy's mac and cheese, it's likely a saturated fat because it does have the dairy. And otherwise, though, not necessarily a bad thing. Dairy, any estrogen that's related to food in that way, similar to soy, we've kind of debunked that has the same kind of connection, that the way that it shows up in the body as a phytoestrogen, or in the case of soy, or I'm not sure what estrogens are in cow dairy necessarily. But we've kind of shown that the kind that we ingest don't act the same as we do with our regular hormones. Linda, we will have some recipes at the end, and Sandy will cover the tofu in a little. Making veggies the star of the show, right? That's the piece to the puzzle that when we're doing meal planning, that's what we want to show up for us. Whole grains, beans and legumes, our unrefined vegetable oils, those nuts and seeds, those are going to be really important to making sure that you feel satisfied, because veggies, while lovely, don't have a lot of fat, don't have a lot of protein to them, even though they have a lot of fiber. So they don't necessarily have a lot of staying power when it comes to keeping you satisfied throughout the day. Certainly eating smaller, more frequent meals is something I always recommend for literally anybody if that works for you. So don't feel bad if you feel like you have to snack here and there to get through the day. That's totally okay. We can eat more than just the once a day if we need to. And then don't forget about those fruits. Some people I know are either more some people love them and some people just don't really find room for them in their diets. So something to kind of think about: how can I fit fruit into my day? If you decide to go meat free or dairy free, making sure that you're checking on your vitamin levels, and checking with your doctor about B12, iodine, which we oftentimes find in fish. So if you're a fish eater, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Using iodized salt probably be just fine to do that. Your iron, just because we get so much bioavailable from animal proteins in that front, and zinc as well. And then, of course, like we mentioned, our calcium and vitamin D. So this is on UConn's website, their ag department website, that kind of tells us what's shaking and growing in Connecticut right now. So as you can see, they just put the letters for the name of the month in here, but it can kind of show us what's in season right now. What are we going to eat? It comes in Spanish as well. But as you can see, the month of August, we're seeing a whole lot of things. There might be some things that are more cool weather foods like asparagus, or some of our greens, cauliflowers, broccolis. Actually grows a little bit, but I think it grows better in the cold. Everything loves to grow here. We have, although it's been a very wet season, so I'm not sure how that's really turned out for a lot of the farmers and such, but it's a lovely time of year to do a lot of exploring around our foods. So the link is here. So if you wanted to access that, I can definitely. I think I sent Chantal the PDF version of this. So if anybody would like a copy of that and can get to that website, but certainly just putting in Healthy Family CT Yukon What's Growing will get you there as well. All right. And so when we're finding out what's in season, that map can be a really great one. I believe USDA Connecticut has one as well, like the CT Grown has one also, because you can use SNAP benefits at a lot of the local farmers markets. And so this USDA local food portal is also a really great source to find what local markets might be in the area, what local farms might be in the area. When springtime comes, or like early spring, a lot of the farms start putting out information about their CSA or their community supported agriculture. So a lot of times you can say, we'll support you buying your seeds and getting your field ready, giving you the money up front. And then when growing season comes, every week or every month or however the farm decides to do it, you can get a box from the farm of fruits and veggies that sometimes you get to pick and choose, sometimes you just get what you get. And it's a fun way to try different things as well. So that's a fun one that you can look up anywhere in the country, what might be good for you to find. These are some of the more local markets to the Manchester Vernon area. Ellington and Coventry farmers markets are absolutely lovely. They're some of my favorites. And then South Windsor, Manchester on Spruce Street, and then the Hartford Regional Market as well on the weekends. I think that says PM, but I believe it's AM. My apologies. That has a wide variety of options to choose from at the Hartford Regional Market if you can get over there. So this is one of the pieces to the puzzle that I want to talk about when we're deciding what we want to utilize for food. And this is one of the pieces to the puzzle that I like to think about, where mental health comes into fact with nutrition, and not just what nutrition can help our mental health is how are we working around food that is also going to help us around that as well. So if you're tired and stressed and getting to that next step is really difficult, that's where a lot of those convenience foods do come into play. And having something like a veggie protein bar, or having food that maybe you make up a bunch when you are feeling a little bit better, and when you're not in that stressed, tired, hungry I think we all understand that cycle of being in that moment. So having some food kind of set up and ready to go to put in the freezer and just kind of heat up whenever you want or whenever you need to, or even just having some things stocked up in the fridge can be a really helpful way to kind of move past that. But convenience foods aren't necessarily a bad thing. We want to kind of take a look at what's going into our mouths, of course, but they also exist for a reason. We have a very interesting time and way of life in America, and how timing works in our day. And so taking that into account is always really important. I never want anyone to say, okay, I'm going to do this, and then they can't figure out how to do it and then get frustrated with themselves that they're not doing the right thing. Do what works for you and do the best that you can. That's all we can ask, right? If there's any healthy, high protein snack bars, Lara bars are absolutely lovely. I highly recommend those. They're super simple ingredients. They're usually just dates and nuts and some kind of other flavors to make them taste good. Highly recommend that. As the main one that I would recommend. I don't know that I'm too up on what all the bars are these days, because certainly I think there's a whole bunch that come out every week. And this is an opportunity to see that when we see something that says that it's plant-based on it, again, as long as it's something that's coming from the earth, even if it's processed in a certain way, a lot of times companies are using that as buzzwords. But if it looks, take a look at the ingredient list. If it looks good to you, that's a good one. But yeah, Lara bars are always my favorite. when we're low in iodine, um, that is that's a good question. We don't really see it super often. I think most of the time, because of how our food industry uses iodized salt enough, it's not too bad. But it's something to be mindful of. And foods that have our good B vitamins are definitely going to be our dark green leafy vegetables are a big one, and then making sure that for the B12 is the one that's usually the biggest in our animal proteins. And that's why sometimes people who are vegetarian, we need to supplement that. And again, every dietitian too is also going to have like different opinions on certain things and what they feel comfortable versus not. Food is really individual, and I think as maybe we don't think about, but it's also really emotional. And so when it comes to what works for you, is totally going to be your call. All right, so talking about some more of what's growing right now in Connecticut. So we saw that list, but here are all the things that in August we're really seeing a lot of right now, especially if you're hitting up those local farmers markets. A lot of these things you can find in the store as well. Sometimes when they're coming from the store, they're not local. Some places like sometimes Trader Joe's, sometimes Big Y, sometimes Whole Foods will get foods in from local joints, local farms, to making sure that we're getting some things that are close to home. But sometimes those aren't necessarily the cheapest. And so stores kind of need to take that in mind on what people are going to buy as well, so that they can meet their profit margins, which is how a business stays open. So it is what it is. But these are a lot of the fun ones that if you were to go to your local market right now or your local farm stand, say something like a Johnny Appleseeds, we might find some things like that there, especially corn, zucchini. Those are my favorites this time of year. I'm a strawberry season is up, but now we're into blueberry season. So that's a very exciting time for me too. I actually have blueberry bushes in my yard. So we don't even have to go too far to collect those. So that's always an option too. If you're really feeling adventurous around the plant-based foods, you could always start growing your own too in your yard, even if it's a little planter of tomatoes on your porch or your window, or some herbs on your window are always a lovely thing to just add in every once in a while. All right, so we did a lot of talking about fruits and vegetables. And so here are some of the other foods that are not fruits and vegetables, but still are plant-based foods that we'll want to see somewhere on our plates along the way. Certainly keeping in mind any allergies or things that don't work for you specifically. So things like, I think I mentioned earlier, some of our whole grains. So farro and barley are all kind of like an amaranth, millet are all kind of like you kind of prepare them like rice in that similar way. Rice is certainly on that list as well. Most of those you're going to find in their whole husk, which is where that whole grain comes into play. When it comes to rice, brown rice is going to be that one that's in its intact husk. But if you like white rice here and there, there's certainly so many other whole grains that we can include to kind of supplement that. Oats, any whole grain breads, and then I think that covers it for our whole grains. Then we have our nuts, walnuts, almonds, peanuts, macadamia nuts, cashews, pistachios, flaxseed, really awesome source of omega-3s, and chia seeds as well, are another lovely source of that too. And then I like to look at lists like this because there's just, sometimes we get stuck on a particular nut or thing that we, would play around with sometimes. So like peanuts are cheap, easy to access most of the time. So, but finding other things where we can try like a cashew butter or an almond butter or even just pistachios. I like to keep, I don't know if this is weird or not, but I like to keep a nice bag of pistachios on my desk at the hospital just to make sure if I'm feeling like I need a snack in the middle of the afternoon, I love some pistachios for that. All right, so here where we kind of get into some of those other protein, so nuts and seeds certainly fall into that category. But these are also some other ones where we get a good portion of our protein from. So things like chickpeas or even hummus included in that as well. Edamame, which is that soybean, lentils, dried peas like split peas, kind of same preparation there. Black navy kidney beans, those you could either buy dry, but they're certainly great to find canned. There's a lot more low salt options for canned foods these days, and canned is just as lovely, especially when it comes to beans. It's just so easy. You can just open and dump. And then tofu and tempeh. So in addition to, I think we had talked about soy earlier, when it comes to cancer risk, again, it's been kind of debunked that we get more benefit from having those fiber-based protein foods than we do with whatever might come up in any kind of changes in our risk factors. Again, I think it can vary so much, and everybody's going to kind of process things a little bit differently. We just don't have the evidence to say, yes, this thing does that in repetitive trials. So that's something that we keep an eye on. All right, so let's kind of read through here about some of our favorite things here. So peaches, herbs, and basil, cucumbers and tomatoes. Oh, cucumbers are one of my favorites too. I'm a pickle girl too. Blueberries, cucumbers, tomatoes. I like a lot of them. And Big Y, yep, Big Y is great for that kind of thing. They have some lovely local stuff. Making smoothies, absolutely. That all sounds really great. Strawberries and blueberries, absolutely. Absolutely. But so the first recipe that I have here is a panzanella, which is like a kind of like a bread salad with tomatoes and grilled corn. I think corn is really lovely this time of year. People really enjoy having it, myself included. And I think I have a quite an affinity for it to be grilled, or even if you don't grill it, even a little bit of a pan saute too, just to kind of get some of those lovely sweet starches out is really nice. So in this one, you're just cutting up some red onion, using a little bit of white vinegar, lemon juice. We have our corn that we're going to grill up a little bit, putting it on a little bit of a flame would be ideal. And then some crusty sourdough bread. Again, a lovely thing that a lot of farmers markets have a lot of wonderful bakers who are doing sourdoughs and have their really great products. So you can kind of use whatever bread that you would like in this, but cut into those little 1-inch slices or even cubes would work well for this. Drizzle with a little bit of olive oil, some tomatoes, some of those torn up basil leaves, some garlic, a little bit of salt, pepper for taste. But kind of bringing that all down, it's really going to be coming up cold for you, but the bread pulls in all of those lovely flavors from like the dressing that comes onto there. And if you use a nice crusty bread, it's not going to get soggy on you. Unless the soggy bread is what you need. All right. This next one, a grilled zucchini ribbons with pesto and white beans. So we're kind of using the zucchini ribbons in this way, which you could use a mandolin. You could use one of those, just a vegetable peeler, just kind of push down really good, where we're kind of almost making it into spaghetti, but not like zoodles, but just a little something where we're kind of making these little strips, grill it up a little bit, and then we'll add a little salt, pepper, some olive oil, squirt a lemon on there, a little garlic clove, a nice can of white beans, which is actually one of my other favorites too. For whatever reason, they just seem to work really well in a plant-based dish. They are just lovely in that way. A little white wine vinegar, and then if you wanted to include things like cheeses, a little grated Parmesan on top would always be a lovely addition. Especially, you can pull back a little on the salt if you're going to add some of the Parmesan too. But another super easy one, has a couple extra steps in it just because of the making the pesto, but you could certainly buy that in the store if you wanted to skip a step, and then grilling up that zucchini. Again, Zucchini you can eat raw too. So if you wanted to make your ribbons and not really grill them up, you could always take that step and it would still be just as good. This is a lovely website, by the way, this Smitten Kitchen. It's not exclusively vegetarian, but a lot of fun recipes, and has lovely cookbooks out in the world as well that I would highly recommend. This is a peach caprese salad. So peach is definitely in season right now. This is another lovely website called The Forest Feast. Absolutely super simple vegetarian meals. Usually she is an artist as well, so the recipes are, she writes them by hand in the images, so they're super easy, or else she'd be really tired from handwriting out a recipe. But so some peaches, some tomatoes in there. If you wanted to add the cheese, feel free to. You also don't have to. But some basil leaves, a little bit of olive oil, flaky salt, and look at those directions. So nice and easy. You're throwing everything on the plate. We're just drizzling it up and digging in. Those are my favorite kind of meals where you don't have to do a whole lot of extra work. And I think somebody had said earlier, God, I'm so tired. This feels like one of those meals that you just slice up a couple things and you're good to go. You can make it on a smaller scale for sure. Oh, gosh. Eating Well magazine's another great source for recipes. Again, not exclusively vegetarian, but they started in Vermont as a dietitian run magazine. So all the ingredients or recipes that are going on in there are mostly dietitian approved these days. So it's a nice one to work with too. But apple season's certainly starting to come up, and we might want something a little bit more cozy as fall does start to join us. So I get very excited about that when it comes to oatmeal and apples for sure. So when we have milk of choice here, you could use anything from a dairy milk, you could use a soy milk, you can use an oat milk, you can use an almond milk, cashew milk, whatever you like. Just keeping in mind that unless it explicitly says protein enhanced, that a lot of times the almond milks, oat milks, cashew milks don't really have a lot of protein to them. So if we're looking to get a good protein in our breakfast, like we often try to do, that you might want to choose something more like a soy or a dairy or one of the like pea protein enhanced other alternatives of milk. And then some toasted pecans on there also help out with a little bit of that fat, little protein. Chia seeds will get there too. Chia seeds are really a funny little seed where you put them in liquid and they'll expand over time, where they get a lot of their satiety, or they make you feel full. Benefits from them, where if we add a little tablespoon of chia seeds into something, you could probably stay full for a decent amount of time.